Before the sky can decide between black and gray, the rails decide for it, singing a hard metallic hymn across the empty Wyoming plains. Rain has come in low, fine stitches through the night, needling the sagebrush and turning two-track trails into ribbons of mud. East to west, a column of steam pushes on, a hot heart beating in a cold ribcage, and the telegraph poles tick off the miles like a metronome for fate. This is the Union Pacific Overland Flyer No, on a fast passenger run carrying mail, express, and the ballast of a changing nation. Ahead lies a short wooden bridge west of Wilcox, behind a continent nursing the fever of speed. It's June 2nd, 1899. Somewhere in the dark, 6 guns sleep in oiled leather, and men in slickers wait with a patience learned from weather. The country out here does not lie for you. It shows its ribs, red rock escarpments, broken draws, cottonwood-choked creekbeds, and invites you to get lost. North and west stand the sanctuaries that raised 100 outlaws like hard winter calves. Hole in the wall, a fortress of sandstone and cheatgrass with approaches that narrow like a rifle barrel, and far off in another state of mind, if not of distance, Robber's Roost, a maze of canyons and chalk trails where a stranger can ride in circles until the sun gives up. In these places, a man learns to drink carefully, watch the ridgeline, and make his own weather. It was there that a drifting fraternity, cowhands too quick with a deck of cards, bronc riders with a taste for dynamite, shaped itself into a loose confederacy. Newspapers would call them Butch Cassidy's Wild Bunch. They preferred another name, nothing at all. If the frontier breeds a certain kind of horseman, the railroad breeds a certain kind of thief. The rails keep time, and time is a weapon if you know how to ride it. These men did. They studied schedules the way a drover studies the sky. They knew where the water stops sat like commas, where a blind curve could hide a lantern, and how far a mail car could be bullied from a sleeping coach without waking a soul. They were modern in their way, not given to spraying lead down a platform, but to precision, planning, and the explosive arithmetic of dynamite. They favored relay strings, fresh mounts cached beneath dark bluffs, and white masks torn from table linens in a world where even the restaurants wore the railroad's brand. Say their names and you conjure faces from a single grim photograph. Butch Cassidy, broad-smiled and calculating. The Sundance Kid, lean and inward, a storm in the bones. Kid Curry, dangerous at the edges. Ben Kilpatrick, Will Carver, Elsie Lay, a shifting cast in a tight drama. But ask exactly who stood by the lanterns that wet morning in History Squints. Witnesses spoke of 3, sometimes 5 or 6. Some said they saw napkin masks. Others saw only slickers and revolvers, horses breathing steam. Even at the root of it, where iron met timber and rain stitched the air, the story keeps its secrets, as if the job itself had been pulled with mass that didn't end at the cheekbones but continued into the record. The plan, whoever authored it, whatever hands revised it, had the elegance of a well-thrown loop. Set a warning signal on the track where the engineer will fear the worst, a damaged bridge in a rainstorm. Force the stop where you want it, not where the railroad prefers. Split the train. The engine in the express car nudged forward across the timber, while the sleeping coaches and the baggage sit stranded. Less a train now than a tale told in 2 halves. Remove the bridge behind the prize. The night and the rain become your posse. The timetable becomes your ally. Keep your voices low. Make the crew actors in your play, and they will remember their lines for you. Whoever stood out there waiting had the patience of a man who has learned to talk with his horse. Imagine the scene. 6 hoof prints darkening with water alongside the ballast, the rubber smell of slickers, the leather creak that gives away a shift in the saddle. Hands file at a fuse cap by feel. Fingers worry at a lead until it sits just so in the powder. One man has the lanterns, one hand steady in the wind, and the other on a pistol that is never quite drawn. Another watches the sky, reading clouds for how long the rain will hold. Men who have worked cattle on night guard know this hour, the drift of thought, the total attention required to keep a herd from standing up and moving. But now the herd is steel, and the way you keep it still is with light. Behind them stretches not just terrain, but a web, Telegraph wires stringing town to town like a cat's cradle, detectives on retainers, and sheriffs with long memories. The wild bunch is old-fashioned only at a glance. Look closer, and you see the modern world they are already fighting. Typed circulars, rewards printed as neatly as bank ledgers, and the speed at which a telegram can make a posse out of strangers. Their answer is mobility. Change horses often. Double back on cattle trails. Cross creeks where the banks crumble into hoof prints too many to follow. And above all, keep talking quiet. No saloon boasts. No swagger at the depot. Play cards where no one asks names. And if a camera ever finds you, treat it as a loaded weapon. As the train approaches, the countryside tenses. The engine's whistle throws a long note over the flats. A lonely sound swallowed by rain. The rails begin to hum not just under the locomotive's weight, but with a sense that history has picked up the pace. Inside the sleeping cars, a child turns in a berth. A traveling salesman dreams of samples and contracts. A rancher rides fences in his sleep. In the express car, C.E. Woodcock, the messenger, sits with his thoughts and his duty. A man paid not to blink. He is the hinge on which a great deal will turn. He does not yet know it. It would be a relief to say that morning broke red and righteous, that the sky opened like a curtain to spill judgment on everyone involved. But the rain does not care for staging, and the light here comes grudging, as if someone behind the horizon is cranking a lantern wick by feel. It is in this difficult half-light that the engineer sees something that should not be there. Lanterns held low, swung slow. Danger, danger, on a stretch of track where danger would look exactly like this. The human mind is wired to sort between accident and malice. But in the rain, with men sleeping behind you and a wooden bridge ahead, you take the cautious reading. The brakes come on, metal screams, steam folds in on itself, and the whole train becomes a single body trying to stop before it breaks its neck on uncertain timber. The engineer leans out into the wet and finds faces only as suggestions behind masks, figures cut from night. Orders are given in the smallest possible voices, and because small voices sound like truth, the crew listens. A man on horseback gestures with a pistol he doesn't need to fire. The train's spine is uncoupled with practiced hands. The locomotive and the express car nudge forward at a crawl. The bridge accepts the weight as if nothing is wrong. Across, safe for the moment. The coaches sit behind like an amputated limb. It is a neat trick, surgically done. If you were a passenger stirring awake, you might not know that the world has been rearranged for you. You might think the stop was for a cow on the track or a quick water check. You might pull the blanket to your chin and listen to the rain. None the wiser that men with dynamite and a plan are writing a page of Western history just beyond your window. And now the rain listens too, as if it understands that its role is about to change. From concealment to applause, from curtain to smoke. The lanterns lower. A fuse is measured in breaths. Somewhere deep in the locomotive, the firebox exhales. Night takes its last full step forward. On the far side of the bridge, the outlaws look at one another not for permission, but for timing. Every man knows his part because they have rehearsed this in silence. Where to place the charges, where the horses wait, how far the first relay is, where the creek runs narrow enough to ford at a trot. They do not yet smile. There will be time for that if the timing holds. What happens next will rip timber, shake iron, and stamp their legend into the prairie mud. But for a moment longer, the West holds its breath the way a rider holds his before the throw. A loop spinning out in slow, immaculate geometry, about to catch the only thing that can never be held, a fast train in a hard rain. The lanterns tilt, the signal changes from warning to will, and the line between plan and act dissolves. The lanterns do not so much appear as resolve out of the weather. Two small planets of yellow swimming through the rain, wagged side to side in the old wigwag of trouble. In the cab, the engineer's hand goes to the Johnson bar and the Westinghouse air lever without a word. Because there are moments on the railroad when talk wastes the exact breath you need for judgment. The fireman leans out, cap pulled low, cheek stung raw by rain, and sees what his partner sees. Light where there should be none. Right where the short timber bridge begins its dark span over the draw. The air dumps and the brake shoes kiss steel. 100 tons of iron begs the night to give it more track than it has. Somewhere down the consist, a sleeper car wakes into a chorus of question marks. Boots thump carpet. A glass trembles to the floor and becomes spangles. The locomotive hisses like an animal. Steam curls back into the crew's faces, hot and metallic, an anvil taste at the back of the throat. They ease to a stop just shy of the bridge, and the engineer pulls the cord once. A warning note that fritters itself out against the rain. No echo comes back. Only those two lights, patient as midwives. When the shapes step out of the dark, you can hear nothing of their tack, but the long, wet exhale of horses. White masks, not parade costume, simply torn cloth, ride above slickers glistening like seal hide. 6 guns sleep in scabbards, but a Winchester shows here and there, kept low. The man closest to the cab doesn't bark. He speaks the way men talk around skittish cattle, even serious, unwilling to let the night misunderstand him. Back her off 1 car length, he says, and the words have the authority of a timetable. Cut the express loose, he adds, nudging the pistol in the direction of the armored car. Cross with the engine and the express. Slow. No heroics. There is a conductor somewhere behind them who knows every name in his consist and could call them out like the beads of a rosary. But just now he has a problem the outlaws have already solved. They've put the decision in the smallest possible circle. 2 men in the cab and 1 with a lantern telling them what to do. The engineer nods because a nod is free and because delay is death when there are passengers asleep who might stumble out onto a platform and bring panic down like a collapsed roof. The fireman slips off the step into ankle-deep cinders and mud, runs back with a brakeman to the coupling. Rain softens everything but iron. The Janny knuckle releases with a heavy, reluctant sigh. Someone shuts an angle cock to hold the air in the standing cars. The hose falls away like a dead snake. Forward, the lantern says. The locomotive and the express car, that square-shouldered vault on wheels, roll a few feet at first, then edge onto the bridge, timbers answering with a sound like old stairs under a church congregation. The engineer keeps 1 eye on the pressure and 1 on the deck ahead. The fireman leans out with his lantern shaded, a pocket of sodium light brimming along the ties. Steam washes the bridge in a pale breath and drifts down into the draw. Somewhere, a passenger turns over and dreams the ocean. The human mind insists on familiar seas when it cannot explain the weather. On the far bank, one of the masked riders takes the bit and backs his horse, giving the engine room to come off the span. Easy, he says, as if the locomotive understands English, which of course it does not, but machines absorb tone the way horses do. When the express car has cleared, the signal changes, and the engineer breaks to a slow crawl. The rest of the train looms back there, black and blind, a heavy thought left hanging in the night. The men with the lanterns have rewritten it into 2 stories on either side of a creek. The crew are ordered down now, careful, hands apart, no sudden bravado that can make disaster rehearse itself. The outlaws don't waste a motion or a syllable. One rider keeps his horse square to the cab, eyes never leaving the engineer's hands. Another posts the fireman at the margin of the light and tells him to stay put. 2 more peel away toward the bridge, stepping like men who move around powder for a living. Their slickers whisper. One carries a canvas satchel that has weight to it, unlike money. The other carries the quiet necessary to handle it. In the short lull, the crew notice the smell. Not coal smoke, not oil, but that clean chemical promise that powder always has. A breath of the quarry and the mine. Dynamite, the West's new grammar. You can hear the creek below shouldering its floodwater against the abutments. You can hear the horse's feet thud once as a rider shifts his weight. You can hear your own heart change tempo to fit a metronome it did not choose. A charge goes on the timber in a way that would make a bridge carpenter wince. Wrong only because it will be right for the men who set it. One outlaw works with a knife between his teeth to free string, nimble in the rain. The other fits a cap like a fiddler seating a bridge. They do not hurry. To rush powder is to confess fear. They have rehearsed this in the map room of their minds so often they could do it asleep. When a match hisses, another rider lifts his head instinctively as a horse pricks its ears at a snake. Flame takes the fuse and turns night into a low orange whisper that moves with intent. The engineer swallows. He has run in 2 sections before. He knows the second is strung back there somewhere on the line, a ghost with its own freight of sleepers and mail coming on the heels of the first. He thinks of it now because his brain is looking for anything that is not the nearest wooden thing about to be taught a violent lesson. He starts to say the section will be close, that men could die if the track's torn up without warning. But the rider watching him lifts one gloved finger. Listen, and the crew hear, faint and impossible, a far-off whistle dopplering through the weather. The night is full of trains. The outlaws know it too, and that is why a man already sits his horse up track, ready to swing a second warning when the time comes. For now, this bridge is the only sentence that matters. The dynamite does not so much detonate as decide. The light runs to the timber like a rumor finding the right ear, and then a white punch of brilliance erases the world's edges. Sound follows like a bear crashing through brush, a boom that pushes the men and the horses and the rain itself backward a half step. The bridge leaps and then collapses into its own black shape, throwing up a gust of splinters and steam and soaked dirt. Echoes run down the draw and bump their heads on the low clouds, then tumble back in a nervous hush. For a breath, the only thing alive is the locomotive's patient chuff, the engine like a heart that refuses to be rattled by anything it cannot pull. The riders do not cheer. They inventory. No sparks licking where they shouldn't. No stray sleepers burning. The horses settle. One stamps. A plank clatters in the draw and becomes part of the new creek. The engineer realizes he's been holding his breath long enough to feel a headache gather behind his eyes. The fireman lets his shoulders drop a degree, as if a single hinge in his back has decided to work again. Behind them, the amputated coaches sit in the rain with their lids on, none the wiser except for a conductor pacing out mystery on a soaked platform. The outlaws have isolated the prize cleanly, an engine and an express car on one side, the rest of the world on the other. Pursuit by rail is now a problem for tomorrow's carpenters. Pursuit by horse will have to puzzle through a creek swollen with ruined timber and a dozen false leads. Down, says the man nearest the express car, and the messenger inside, Woodcock, though the crew do not speak his name yet, stiffens at the latch. He has a shotgun and a wage and the narrow pride of a man paid to be the spine of a small fort. From outside, soft as rain, the order comes again, this time to the crew. Stand clear. The lantern light strokes the iron skin of the car and turns rivets into stars. One outlaw sets his palm to the door and feels it the way a doctor feels a ribcage. Another unrolls a length of fuse and measures it not in inches, but in breaths. In the cab, the engineer makes a small private inventory of miracles. They came to a stop without cracking the bridge. They crossed without throwing a wheel. The crew still have all their fingers. It counts for something that the men with masks are technicians first and gunmen last. Anyone can make a mess of a train with bullets, but it takes a different kind of nerve to cut it in half and keep everyone alive while you do. The rain gathers itself and comes again, a colder sheet, as if the sky has been persuaded by the blast that it should participate more seriously. The horses turn their hips to the weather. The men working at the express door glance once toward the ruined bridge as if checking a latch. And perhaps that is what the explosion has given them, a locked door behind. They have narrowed the world to a manageable room. This stretch of track, this iron box, these few minutes that must be lived with precision. They chalk a mark on the metal without thinking about it, the way a carpenter squares a line to a joist, then press the charge. The lantern is lowered, the flame cupped, the fuse set to kiss it. Woodcock inside lifts the shotgun to his shoulder and finds the one true thing a man can hold when he is about to be broken against forces bigger than pay and duty: stubbornness. The crew step back, collarbones prickling with the knowledge that powder is again about to interpret the night in its own language. The rider by the cab eases his horse, keeping the engine between himself and most of what might fly when the door goes. He looks at the engineer with a patience that might in another life have been friendship. "No moves," he says, not unkindly. The engineer nods because there is nothing left but nods and the count you keep in your head when you know the length of a fuse by the way it spits. Steam hangs in the rain like breath on a cold morning. Somewhere far behind, the second section of the Overland flyer lays a strand of sound across the prairie that will take long minutes to arrive. Here the world has shrunk to a whisper, a hush, and the small, determined snake of fire crawling toward iron. The The bridge is gone. The prize is here. The night holds its poise like a marksman just before the squeeze. And in that poised dark, the fuse keeps eating. The fuse keeps eating. A little snake of fire with the manners of a clerk and the intentions of a thunderhead. And then the door of the express car decides the argument all at once. A square of iron becomes a howl. Rivets shear like snapped teeth. Boards surrender, not one by one, but as a single startled creature. The concussion folds the rein backward, slaps steam against the locomotive's flanks, and knocks the night off its hinges. When the shuddering settles, the air is a different air. Gritty with pulverized wood, salted with the bitter almond tang of powder, flecked with soot that looks like black snow. From inside comes the sound men make when they have been struck by something too large for their understanding. The messenger, Charles E. Woodcock, tries to sit up and cannot. He is conscious enough to hate what has happened, but too dazed to stand between it and its sequel. He fumbles for the shotgun and manages only the stubbornness that made him reach for it in the first place. The outlaws do not spill into the car like raiders in a penny dreadful. They enter the way a farrier enters a stall with a skittish horse, hands shown, voices low, yet the authority of posture unmistakable. Two masked men climb over the splintered threshold and one calls out for the crew to stay back. The other kneels by Woodcock, strips the shotgun from his hands with a motion that is almost polite, and shoves it away as if it were a snake he does not wish to kill. The messenger is hauled upright and propped against a crate, where he blinks at the world with the maddening clarity of a man who knows his job is to refuse, and that fate has delayed his opportunity to do so by knocking out parts of his brain not strictly needed for courage. The first blast has opened the car, not the safe. It sits there, iron-eyed and indifferent, the way banks learn to look at people. A seam shows, a promise of leverage perhaps, but time locks have their own religion, and the outlaws do not argue theology. One of them works from a canvas satchel, dynamite sticks that look innocent as yellow candles, caps that gleam with a jeweler's finickiness, a coil of fuse kept dry under his slicker. He rasps a measurement against his thumb. Habit, not calculation. Then cuts. The charge is pressed to the safe door with a confidence that would scandalize the men who designed it. The outlaw tamps a wad of wet sacking against the joint, because even in a storm the blast will search for the path of least resistance. He doesn't explain himself, he doesn't boast, he just works, a craft at the service of theft. Woodcock finds his feet enough to hiss, "You'll not," and gets no further. An outlaw leans close and says, not unkindly, "Best keep your teeth." That tone is a signature. Brains before bloodshed. If cruelty breaks loose, it will be as accident, not plan. The messenger, seeing he has given all the heroics his skull can spare tonight, saves the rest for the report he means to file if he lives long enough to write it. The crew, ringing the doorway with rain on their hats and decision in their throats, hold still because stillness is the most expensive thing they can buy that does not require a bullet. They have minutes, and minutes have never been so loud. The second section of the Overland Flyer is out there in the dark, with its own locomotive and its own dreamers, coming west with the same certainty. The outlaws account for it with a prudence the newspapers will never properly admire. A rider set well up the line to flag it down, to stop strangers from shattering themselves on the missing bridge. Brains again. This is not slaughter. This is arithmetic under weather. The fuse takes, spits, and lays its quiet road toward the safe while the car holds its breath. Outside, the rain has resumed its craft, stitching the world together with invisible thread. Inside, two lanterns make islands of yellow where men's hands gather their arguments. A sack of mail has burst and spilled its entrails across the floor. Letters from St. Louis to Salt Lake, a child's careful note to a father somewhere beyond the mountains. A bill of lading that dreamed of a ledger, now the edges singed and curling. One of the outlaws uses the toe of his boot to nudge the loose paper away from the charge, not because he loves the mail, but because fire loves paper too easily. The blast takes the safe the way a storm takes a fence post, decisively, out of proportion, but with its own logic. The door jumps and then hangs back, mangled, a mouth broken open by a cruel dentist. Heat bellows out of the wound. Smoke rejoins the soaked air and turns it to a sour soup. The outlaws fall in close and go to work. This part is never cinematic in the way melodramas like to make it. It is inventory. Canvas coin bags torn open, determined thumbs sliding paper bands off packets of currency, quick left-right glances for anything that glitters like a small sun. The take is heavy with the awkwardness of value. Coin is weight, and weight is a liability to a man who will be riding hard, so they choose with a miser's discipline. Paper first, the registered packages they can carry in saddlebags, a few smaller bags of gold where the ratio of shine to burden pays. What they leave is nearly as eloquent as what they take. A drift of burned envelopes, iron filings like gray frost on the floor, a time lock scowling in the ruin of its principles, and Woodcock knocked down again by concussion and anger, trying to separate dignity from injury, and finding that the two are tied together with wire. An outlaw tosses him a canteen. It is not kindness so much as the maintenance of rules. A messenger who doesn't die is not a rope around your own neck later in a courthouse. The men move with a clock in their backs. Sacks are filled to the weight a horse will accept for distance. One rider slips out, checks the way the rain swarms across the lantern light, returns and nods. The outer world remains in its place. Another shoves a parcel into the engineer's hands and says, "Carry," not because he needs the help, but because telling a working man to pick something up is a method of keeping him in a workable shape of fear. The engineer obeys, and afterward will discover that obedience tastes like iron and hay in a small, survivable shame. A minute stretches into a canvas big enough to paint later rumors on. Some will swear there were 6 men, some 5, a few 3. Memory is a trestle bridge. It shivers under load. But there is no mistaking the discipline. No shooting for pleasure. No shouting to hear their own bravery. And somewhere up the line, that second section wails again, a high, sorrowful note that strikes the breastbone. The flagman will have his hands full. You can almost see him in your mind. Lantern held out like a priest's candle, his horse stepping sideways from noise it cannot name. The rider yelling above wind that wants the last word. The sacks go to saddle. The messenger's shotgun is dropped under the tender, out of reach until the world no longer matters. One of the outlaws picks up a single letter, looks at the childish hand on the front, and sets it on a crate where the floor is least wet. You can make of that whatever you like. The truth is simpler. Dry paper burns less readily if another blast becomes required, and habit is a man's truest teacher. They are ready now. The car looks like a room that has had an argument with weather and lost. The safe is a broken jaw. The crew, herded by circumstance to the threshold, stand with their palms open to show they hold nothing that could change a living minute into a dead one. The outlaws step back into the rain the way sailors step from hold to deck, blinking, immediately recalculating distances, letting the more honest air cleanse the powder from their thinking. One swings into his saddle with a liquid impatience. Another checks cinch and latigo by feel. Horses toss and settle. Wet leather talks to itself. There is a temptation here, in every story told afterward, to grant the men parting words pointed enough to make the legend tidy. But some jobs end with no moral, only motion. A rider gives the smallest nod to the engineer, a courtesy or a tick. Who can say? And then the band turns nose to the dark where the first relay string waits. They pass their own earlier hoof prints, already softening into formlessness, and choose a line that will punch through a shallow ford where the turbid water hides their going. Farther on, a layer of fresh horses will make speed feel inexpensive again. After that, a split into pairs or singles, a pattern as old as the prairie. Vanish not once, but repeatedly until pursuit is chasing not men, but options. Behind them, the express car still breathes out its scorched sermon. The locomotive huffs as if unconvinced by human affairs. The crew tend to woodcock with the respectful clumsiness of men who wish to honor courage without touching pain. In another world, a timetable clerk will write delayed in a narrow hand and think that's sufficient to call this night by its name. Here on the ground, delay has been the instrument and the music. The outlaws ride the rest of the song into darkness. They do not look back, because looking back is slower than remembering later. And they will remember the particular smell of powder and rain, the shock that came up through the soles from the bridge going, the sight of money made suddenly physical, something you could carry away through weather like contraband sunshine. What they cannot know is how quickly the wires will sing their names, and how the rain will preserve and erase their sign with equal zeal. For now, there is only the wet country and the promise of the next horse, the next creek, the next decision made before the daylight can get its bearings. Behind, the engineer gathers himself and thinks of the report he will have to give in plain language that will feel to him like lying, because plain language dries out nights like this until they crack. Ahead, the wild bunch, whatever names history finally nails to those masts, enter the geography that belongs to men who planned for it when the sky was still undecided. The lanterns dim to small coins of memory. The prairie absorbs what it can. The rest rides on. At Medicine Bow, the station clock is a wet coin of light on the wall, and the telegrapher's fingers are already moving, the brass sounder clacking like a grasshopper trapped in a tin. The engineer has stumbled in with rain in his beard and powder still in his lungs and spoken the words that turn a local emergency into a regional storm. Train held up west of Wilcox, express car blown, safe gone. The message runs east and west at the speed of wire, the way weather moves across the Platte. First a hiss, then a sheet, then a weight that leans on every town along the line. In Omaha, a clerk rolls a sheet into the typewriter and bangs out the reward circulars with language practiced like a prayer. $1,000 per man, additional sums for information leading to arrest and conviction, expenses to be covered for organized pursuit. The wires spit it back to Rollins, Laramie, Douglas, Casper. By breakfast, the West has a new vocabulary word for the day: Wilcox. Men assemble because that is what men do when trouble finds rails. A deputy who thought he had a quiet night, a stock detective with the caution of someone who has had to be careful for a living, a freighter familiar with every two-track between town and the red wall country. A ranch kid long on nerve and short on a sense of his own size in the world. Some have Winchesters, some Colts worn bright at the muzzle. Most have coats not meant for rain, but serviceable enough when the heart is up. A few horses are blown from the night's work and get a long look before being passed over. Others stand eager, ears pricked by the mood that riders carry in their hands as surely as in their spurs. A posse in this country is not uniform. It is a conversation on horseback. A sheriff says what roads will be tried. A rancher argues for a cutoff he once used to push a lost bunch through storm. A railroad agent insists on following the line of least resistance because iron has its own logic. Every man believes he has read the minds of men he has never met. Out there, the wild bunch have already reduced the world to variables they can live with. Pair off, keep your mouth shut. Take the left draw, not because it is prettier or easier, but because it is harder to track two abreast, and your animals will thank you for a slower climb later. Where the creek opens, cross. Where it narrows, cross again. Hoof prints drown as quickly as crimes do when the weather is right. When a patch of sand insists on testimony, drag a cedar bough to comb the truth to a vague suggestion. At a certain cottonwood, pull and retie the cinch on a fresh horse cached 2 nights ago. Then set your first horse free with the reins thrown over the horn, a small herd conscripted to lie for you, wandering tracks confounding arithmetic. The men who plan this job understand that a country big enough to hide in is also big enough to get lost in if you do not keep your compass in your bones. The first special out of town is not a movie train packed with riflemen, but a handcar of facts. Who saw what, when, and with how much certainty? The operator in Wilcox swears to white masks. A section man remembers the way the outlaws handled themselves. Soft-spoken, deliberate, no whooping. The engineer can quote orders nearly word for word. Fear has a way of taking dictation. A man in a slicker cutting fuse by lamplight is remembered not by his face, but by the calm of his shoulders. And always the same detail. Fresh horses, somewhere beyond the first turn of dark. A detective takes these fragments and pins them to a mental map, a patchwork of creek names, cattle trails, and unmarked passes that locals know by stories, not by survey. Then he looks up at the cloud ceiling and decides how many hours rain will continue to work on behalf of the guilty. The Pinkertons are summoned because the West has learned to import expertise the way it imports stoves and sewing machines. They arrive not as cavalry, but as a set of habits. Catalog the marks a horse leaves when his left hind shoe is worn at the inside quarter. Note the habit of a certain rider to let his animal short step downhill. Measure the ash left where a sulfur match was struck under a rock lip. Count the cigarette stubs and the different cuts of tobacco to guess how many men stood watch. They ask questions with no ceremony and write answers in a hand as crisp as a banker's. Out of such unromantic work, a net is woven that has less to do with daring than with patience. The countryside the riders enter gathers itself into complication, sage like a green ocean, coulees that hide a man at 20 paces and swallow sound, the red wall escarpment shouldering the horizon like a fortification thrown up by sullen gods. Here and there a line camp with a stovepipe coughing, a dog that knows the difference between strangers and friends and tells everyone about it. In these places, the bunch have friends not because they are saints, but because their money is real, their politeness trained, and their trouble not yet contagious. A pair may ask for coffee and get it. Another pair may ask for nothing and get a lookout anyway. A cowboy riding the rim for the next hour because in this country, a man earns his own luck by how much of it he shares. As the day turns, the telegraph learns to chant. Notices go out with the rhythm of liturgy, $1,000 per man, more for the principals, and in fine print the promise of expenses for those who give chase. Money has a way of discovering courage in the aisle seat of doubt. Farmhands who don't own guns borrow them. A deputy who has never ridden in real anger suddenly finds that the anger has been riding him for years, waiting. A sheriff counts cartridges, counts men, and in the counting hears the silence of the ones he doesn't have. You can lift a west with wire, but wire cannot ride a ridge. Sheriff Josiah Joe Hazen, square-shouldered, practical, a man with the brand of Converse County stamped in his habits, leans into his saddle and points north out of Casper, toward sign that wavers like heat in the distance. What he follows first is not certainty but report. 3 men, maybe 4, with good horses and a habit of pausing to look back from the high points. He adds his own eyes to the equation and discovers that the land is a co-conspirator. It tells just enough truth to draw you deeper. The posse strings out as all posse do, the fit men up front and the heartsick at the rear thinking of the long miles home. They halt at a creek where the water says nothing, its surface scabbed with cottonwood trash torn loose by last night's tantrum. Then someone finds a wet print on a flat rock, a horseshoe scarred by a split caulk, and the whole group inhales like a single animal. Hours pass that will later be counted in the dry language of a report. Crossed such and such draw at such and such hour. Halted to water. Observed smoke at a distance. Pursued. In the moment, they are felt as a sifting of doubt and resolve through the body, the way a long trot rearranges a man's bones until he is more intention than comfort. Hazen keeps them honest, turning to look at faces the way a captain studies a crew for signs of weather. He is not reckless. He is in range country he half owns by right of work, and he believes, as any man will, that he can read a bend in the trail the way he reads his own kitchen table. Near Dugout Creek, the ground pinches, a shallow cut bank to one side, sage and low willow to the other, the kind of place that looks harmless until you remember that harmless places have seen more dying than dramatic ones because men drop their guard where the world seems to do the same. Somewhere ahead, sign gone thin, a piece of rawhide left where a rope was hastily mended, a burned match head tucked into wet sand where someone shielded a light. Hazen eases his horse, raises a hand, and the posse compresses on itself like a concertina closing. The first shot is not a warning. It is a statement made with a Winchester that knows its doctrine. Hazen folds forward, then sideways, then is on the ground with a puzzled calm on his face that some wounded men wear, as if the body has hustled them into a quiet shed to negotiate terms. Another shot. A horse bawls and goes down hard, legs turning to separate questions. The men nearest the sheriff pull him by his armpits into the cut of the bank, while 2 return fire into the willow and dirt, shooting at sound because sound is all the enemy has been willing to give. A deputy swears he saw a hat brim and empties a cylinder at it. The hat does not offer an opinion. It lasts a minute or forever. When the rifles fall silent, the creek resumes its ordinary labor, as if insulted at the interruption. Hazen's breath is shallow and urgent. The men do what men do when they have not rehearsed grief. They argue logistics as if volume could thicken the blood. Then they gather themselves and perform the small mercies. Coat under the head, canteen to the lips, the lie told cleanly that a doctor will be along shortly. Some will swear the date is June 5th, others June 6th. Memory, like a creek, shifts banks when the flood goes back down. But there is no dispute about the essential thing. A sheriff has been shot in the gut chasing men who have already melted into a geography that chooses its favorites. The posse will get him to help, and help will do its best. And in the end, the ledger will still read Hazen. Gone. Afterward, the hunt changes temperature. Rewards thicken with new ink. The word murder gets itself stapled to the case in a way that will not be removed by argument. A Pinkerton, Charlie Siringo say, will later write of whispers and sign pointing to Kid Curry as the triggerman, and a stock detective named Tom Horn will drift through the story like a thorn in a coat sleeve. Present, irritating, hard to place exactly, efficient in ways not everyone will approve. Proof? That is the thing the West usually lacks exactly when it wants it most. And yet a story will stand in for proof if you let it. And the country, hungry for the difference between outlawry and murder, will find its moral in the absence of certainty. The bunch ride on not triumphal, but thinned by the arithmetic of consequence. Up on the red wall, wind prints its invisible signature on the grass and erases what hoofbeats say as they pass. Down in towns tied by wire, 1,000 hands touch 1,000 posters bearing numbers that make the mind warm and the conscience cool. Which will catch the fugitives first, money or method? Which really runs faster here, horses or news? The West waits to find out, and while it waits, it sharpens itself on the story. By night, the posses bank their fires low under cottonwoods and listen to the creek talk. By day, they fan through coulees that fold back on themselves like lies. Sometimes they are a mile behind and do not know it. Sometimes they are a day off and refuse to believe it. Sometimes they are exactly where the outlaws want them, and fear and prudence, those old brothers, pull even in a man's chest until he cannot tell which is the braver choice, to push or to hold. Somewhere beyond the next ridge, the wild bunch arrange their faces to become nobody in particular and let the country take them in like a cathedral hiding its priests. They have ridden into the thick part of their legend now, where every choice makes newsprint on one side and myth on the other. The wires keep singing, the rewards keep rising, the rifles keep clean, and a sheriff's name begins the long, solemn walk from a town's daily talk into the hard memory that lives between church bells on Sundays. Night comes early to men who have lost someone. The posse rolls in their blankets, boots under heads, and stare up through willow tracery at a sky the color of old tin. What do you chase when the men you're after have learned to darken their own footprints? What do you become while you chase them? The creek says nothing. The horses shift their weight and let out long breaths like men trying to sleep. And somewhere under a red wall cut by draws, the bunch taste rain on their lips and plan the next mile in a language the country understands. The man who finally traps you is sometimes a stranger you invited to do so. In a studio on a Texas street, Fort Worth, warm air pressing through the window like a nosy ant, 5 men take their leisure in front of a camera. The walls wear patterned paper too cheerful for the business at hand. A velvet backdrop makes a small stage out of nothing. The photographer adjusts the lens with the clerical patience of a man who tidies with light. Hats are set at angles that say, "We belong here." Butch Cassidy with his courthouse smirk. The Sundance Kid with that inward gaze like a secret under glass. Kid Curry sharpening the air around him without moving. Ben Kilpatrick long in the limbs. Will Carver, all quiet calculation. The shutter blinks. The image settles into chemistry. And with that prim little click, the wild bunch give the world a gift no posse ever could have taken by force. Their faces, neatly arranged and lit, suitable for framing or pursuit. They pay for the prints in clean money and walk into the afternoon as if they had not just signed their names to every future argument. What begins as a private joke, a souvenir for men their own legend is already amusing, becomes a circular, then a clipping, then an obsession. The new halftone presses make photographs easy to breed. Every sheriff with a desk and a drawer gets a copy. Every railroad detective with a habit of note-taking tucks one behind his ledger. The image takes the place of rumor in 1,000 minds. It is one thing to hunt the men who robbed the Overland. It is another to hunt this jaw, that set of eyes, these hats tilted so, those ties knotted in a way a barber could swear to. The picture gives pursuit a pronoun. The bunch have lived by names that fit like borrowed coats. Robert Leroy Parker, answering on good days to Butch Cassidy. Harry Alonzo Longabaugh to the softer, deadlier music of Sundance. Harvey Logan to Kid Curry, a name that walks like a grin until someone dies and then won't wash off. Ben Kilpatrick, known as the Tall Texan. Will Carver, a shade among storefronts until the light hits him right. Aliases are the currency of a West learning to keep books. You could be Mr. Low at a boarding house, Mr. Place at a ticket window, Mr. Ryan if a hotel ledger asked for flourish. A man's signature was once his hand on a horse's withers. Now it is letters that can be forged or shed. Yet a face, once printed, has a way of erasing the freedom of a dozen names. Lawmen, too, are learning new habits. The Pinkertons curate their rogues gallery like a library and trust in cross-referencing the way a hunter trusts the wind. They file the Fort Worth portrait beside older carte de visite in newer mugshots. Add sketches of ears and noses the way a careful rancher notes the cow with the torn dewlap or the heifer with a pale star. Height, weight, a scar under the eye, a penchant for bowler hats when city money allows. These details knit into a net no lariat could throw. Ink replaces romance. The pursuit of outlaws is becoming a paper craft executed with steel patience. And the bunch, who have made a science of timing and powder, find themselves pressed by a rival science equally modern and more relentless. Records. Meanwhile, the newspapers, needing heroes and villains for breakfast, assign parts with the confidence of theater managers. On Monday, Butch and Sundance are Robin Hood with better horses. On Tuesday, they are wolves and slickers gnawing at the country's arteries. Dime novels have trained the public to expect a flourish when guns are drawn. Telegraphy has trained it to expect news before coffee cools. The truth is less tidy. The Wilcox job was audacity married to arithmetic. The photographs, the wires, the rewards, those are the long echo building its own weather system over the plains. Ask now who actually wrote at Wilcox, and clarity buckles. The image in the Fort Worth studio demands we backfill the past to match the faces. They must have been there. Yet testimony is a row of fence posts that never land quite straight. One brakeman swears he saw 3. A section hand says 5 or 6. White masks shining like damp flags in the lantern glare. A messenger remembers discipline more than faces. Low voices, deft hands, the careful way they set charges as if they were house carpenters replacing a stubborn hinge. Some historians argue Butch planned the caper, while others executed. That Sundance handled the talk at the rail while Curry watched the dark for movement, with a finger along a trigger guard, cool as law. Others reverse the roles. Memory hates rain and dynamite. Rain and dynamite were what the job was made of. The photograph does not settle the question, it only insists on it. Everywhere the circular travels, it changes the mood in rooms. A railroad agent going through the mail finds himself staring at faces that make him keep counting the stamps. A station master signing a waybill pauses to look through the window with his eyes before he looks with his head. A hotel keeper brings in the afternoon paper and holds the page at arm's length, the famous 5 in their fine clothes, and then glances at his parlor, measuring coats on a rack and hats on a peg. The modern West isn't so much a place now as it is a system, and systems are good at spreading recognition the way prairie fires spread sparks. The bunch do what they have always done: split, quiet down, become other people in small rooms. But the rooms are smaller than they used to be. The camera has shrunk them. They play poker in a corner of a saloon and keep their laughter modest. They tip well in a dining room where Harvey House girls move like order disguised as grace. They borrow names with polite hands and leave them in the chamber pot if they suspect the landlord writes letters to sheriffs. Yet once you have been printed, you are every man's neighbor. A clerk at a clothing store thinks he's seen you and tells his cousin at the express company. A cowboy in town for salt and shoes squints at your face, then at the poster, then at his own trust in his eyesight. One uncertain look becomes 5 phone calls, when there are phones, and 10 telegrams, when there are not. What the Fort Worth picture most accomplishes is to tighten the distance between act and consequence. Once, a man could disappear behind a ridge and emerge 3 towns away, wearing a different hat and a cleaner story. Now he carries the ridge with him in a pocket-sized likeness he never consented to. The half-tone dots that make his grin in the paper also make the noose in the reader's mind. And when rewards grow fresh ink after a sheriff's death, the math of betrayal starts looking like a paycheck. Towns with no taste for violence discover their taste for certainty. And yet the Hall of Mirrors remains. Step closer to any account of Wilcox, and you see how the reflections multiply. A barkeep remembers napkin masks and a stubborn courtesy. A ranch wife recalls a pair of worn horses turned loose at dawn, reins trailing like ribbon, and a polite knock at the door for water. A deputy tells a story so often he can no longer feel where his fear ended and his bravery began. Each recollection is true in the way a piece of sky is true. Accurate, limited, misleading if you insist it is the whole weather. The Pinkertons professionalize that weather. They send Charlie Siringo to gather whispers, weigh them, and write them down in a hand harder to argue with than a man's memory. They compare the Fort Worth photograph to sketches made in Wyoming after Wilcox. Lay alias upon alias until the page goes dark with ink. They bicker among themselves in memoranda. You can feel the heat rising off. Who was present? Which man shot Hazen? And in their disagreement is a lesson the West keeps teaching. A story can be made sharp by argument and still not cut to the bone. Meanwhile, the Wild Bunch live as if their names were rumors again. They ride badlands that have already agreed to keep the secret of their hooves. They wait out storms in line camps, trading coin for coffee and the quiet favor of silence. They pull their hats low when trains idle at sidings and watch Pinkerton men step down with satchels of paperwork as heavy as their pistols. The camera has followed them into a narrower century, and they can feel the walls. And yet, there are moments that resist the accounting. A child's letter, rescued from the drenched floor of a torn mail sack and set on a crate to dry by a robber who did not wish to burn. A horse turned loose with reins looped to prevent panic, as if even in flight a man remembered to be kind. These do not excuse anything. They only complicate it, which is to say they make it human. By the time the Fort Worth Five are as familiar in parlors as the governor's face, the legend of Wilcox has lengthened its shadow. People who were not yet born when the bridge went up now hold opinions about who stood on the track. That is what photographs do. They make strangers into neighbors and memories into claims. The West, halfway shed of its buckskin and halfway into its necktie, learns to read its own reflection and suspect it. The bunch will get a little farther yet, far enough to stamp other towns with their hoof marks, far enough to dream oceans. But from this moment in the studio, from that polite little blink of a shutter, the end begins, slow as a fuse and just as certain. 5 men stroll out of a photograph and into 100,000 minds. The wires sing the tune. The posters keep time, and every mirror they pass after that shows a wanted man stepping toward himself. Wilcox does not end when the smoke thins. It continues like a long note through a brass horn, bending the air of every town the wires touch. For a time, the Wild Bunch ride between consequences and confidence, a narrow trail that still holds so long as the horses are fresh and the planning keeps its edge. But a legend is a hungry animal. It demands a second course. The rails offer it. August 1900, the high summer when heat makes iron sing and mirage-stacked towns on the horizon. Another Union Pacific train rattles toward Tipton, Wyoming, a speck of a stop where the timetable barely pauses to catch breath. The method echoes Wilcox like a refrain you cannot get out of your head. A forced halt, a careful isolation of the express car, and that same yellow arithmetic of dynamite pressed where men in offices swore mathematics would protect property. The blast is not as theatrical as the bridge at Wilcox, no timber flung into a flood, but it is efficient, and efficiency is what gets remembered by the men who carry the sacks. The take moves into saddlebags with the brisk gravity of a harvest. Somewhere a telegrapher stabs at keys and finds he no longer needs to ask how to spell the names that go on the circular. He could write them in his sleep. The Pinkertons add another sheet to a file already gaining the thickness of a winter quilt. The word similar method reappears so often they stop meaning similar and begin to mean signature. A month later, the bunch spool the map out farther because a net that tightens in one place must loosen in another. September 1900, Winnemucca, Nevada. High desert light so clean it looks like it has been washed. First National Bank standing with the confidence brick always wears. They walk in dressed as the sort of men who ask for change, move with the calm of men who have weighed what panic costs, and walk out with money that makes horses heavy, a figure the newspapers will argue about, with the glee of men fighting over a number they could never earn. The bicycle-riding telegraph boy earns his own legend, sprinting for the wires to carry the alarm out to ranches and depots and bunkhouses where men read the notice with their mouths set and their eyes bright. By nightfall, road dust is rising from half a dozen directions. The desert holds all of it without comment. This is the twilight run of the Wild Bunch, an afterimage as bright as the original strike. But the west below them has been taking on weight. Telephones begin to hatch in offices. You can speak a description into one end of a wire and hear it come out the other end with the same urgency. Rewards fatten with new ink. A sheriff's widow somewhere makes a speech without ever leaving her kitchen because every poster carries her tone. Railroad detectives trade notes with county attorneys, and the coordination that used to take weeks now arrives in a day. There are men now who can sit at a desk and make your horse slow down without ever seeing your horse. That is what the century is about to become. Butch Cassidy senses it. So does the Sundance Kid. They do a thing outlaws rarely do on purpose. They change the horizon. In 1901, they board a ship under civilized names and watch the continent reduce itself to a line. A woman goes with them, at a place poised where grace and nerve meet, her presence confounding the story people like to tell about dangerous men in their solitude. In Buenos Aires, the air has a maritime damp, quite unlike Wyoming's crisp thinness. The Spanish goes into the ear like music and then becomes a tool. The money they carry opens doors the law might have shut. The three of them ride inland into Patagonia, where the light is so large you can forget there is anything above it. They buy land and describe it as a ranch, and for a while the world permits the lie to be true. In the Shalila Valley, a new rhythm replaces the timetable and the dynamite clock. Fences to mend, hands to hire, cattle that insist on the old chaos even when the human heart longs for order. Butch, whose mind was always half ledger and half prank, takes to the work in a way that makes some later readers ache. There is a world where he never left it. Sundance fits himself to the quiet with less ease, but with the stubborn focus the West always paid him for. Etta rides like someone who believes horses think well of her. The three of them make a picture in the morning light that you could mount over a mantle and call redemption. But redemption, like any luxury, needs conditions. The bunch's past does not stay buried. The new century is good at exhumation. Agents from the great detective agencies do not mind the sea, and Argentine papers can print a photograph as readily as Wyoming ones. A bank in Santa Cruz is robbed by men strangers swear look familiar, which is both meaningful and meaningless in a world where wanted posters have made half the population look familiar. Visits from lawmen increase. Polite, inquisitive, tireless, they arrive with questions folded so neatly you'd swear they were invitations. Butch and Sundance answer some, ignore others, and read the wind with the old twitch in the jaw. This quiet will end on someone else's schedule. They sell the place. They move farther out, Chile, Bolivia, chasing a smaller and smaller version of the privacy they once bought with distance, and now must rent by the week with vigilance. The robberies attributed to them in South America take on the shimmer of campfire talk, some plausible, some wishful, some just geography doing its work on story. What never fades is the modernity nipping at their horses' heels. Bank managers in country towns keep pistols under desks wrapped in velvet as carefully as records. Telegrams explode outward from a dusty office the moment anything untidy happens. Railroad men learn to treat schedules like laws and not suggestions. Meanwhile, back north, the work Wilcox began continues even where no blast shakes the air. Barbed wire tightens around the open range, dividing cattle from sheep, neighbor from neighbor. The conflicts it starts are less cinematic than the OK Corral, but they redraw counties all the same. Automobiles appear in towns like Jokes, then stay. A machine that can outrun a tired gelding without asking for water is a problem no outlaw tradition has notes for. Fingerprints become a discipline. The Bertillon system teaches clerks to think like mathematicians with calipers. A man's head measured on 3 axes is now as damning as a confession. Cameras have gotten smaller and meaner and no longer require a studio for betrayal. A newspaper boy can catch a face in the street and lay it on a breakfast table 2 states away in days. The Wild West has not died so much as it has been organized out of the corners where it kept its keys. And still, how bright that flare at Wilcox was. A wooden bridge jumping like a hooked fish. An express car peeled open like a stubborn oyster. A company town running on wire and schedule, briefly forced to remember that stubborn men on horseback could still rewrite a night if they handled powder tenderly enough. People call it the last great train robbery not because none came after. Others did. But because Wilcox felt like the hinge where horse and machine wrestled in honest daylight, and both walked away limping. It is the picture you hang at the end of an era when you want to remember the argument and not the paperwork. What becomes of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid after the Patagonian photographs yellow is a quarrel that keeps historians busy and campfires warm. Bolivia says some, San Vicente, gunsmoke in a mining town, a body on a mule, the kind of ending the age could understand even if the ledger cannot balance every line. Others keep a small window open, the kind that looks out on versions of a man sliding into other names and living long enough to watch the world misplace him. This script will not pretend to know what the fog in that window hides. It is enough to say that after Wilcox, the old gambles got dearer and the payoffs meaner, and the men who preferred road dust to desk dust ran out of road. What did Wilcox mean? It was spectacle. Yes, the sort no reader can forget, but also diagnosis. It revealed a country that had learned to move at industrial speed, but had not yet learned to make law travel as quickly as money. It showed the world the dignity and the danger of craft. That dynamite could be wielded with a carpenter's conscience, that violence could be argued down to its minimum effective dose and still warp the lives it touched. It proved that myth does not wait for funerals. It rides behind the act, saddled and ready, and by morning it has already chosen its photographs. Stand at the railbed west of Wilcox today, where the cottonwoods shake their coin-leaf laughter in the wind, and the scene arranges itself if you let it. You can hear the whistle fold into the rain, the calm voice at the cab, the fuse writing its bright letter to the timber. You can see the engineer's hand hovering over a lever that will obey him as faithfully as God will not. You can smell powder and steam, both clean in their way. And if you listen hard enough, you can hear the wires waking, the world about to know what happened here before the men who did it have time to be proud or sorry. Was it daring genius or the beginning of the end? Did the bunch write a love letter to a dying frontier, or did they sign the death certificate with the same pen? Maybe the answer is the West's favorite kind. Both. The men who blew the bridge believed a good plan could still outrun a system. The system learned otherwise. In history, content has always to be two things at once, kept the smoke and the paperwork both. The horses are long gone, the rails remain, and somewhere, on a quiet shelf, in a quiet room, the Fort Worth Five still tip their hats to a camera that could not guess how much work it had just made for the future.